why would a winery bottle? Because obviously it makes life complicated because of not just the investments, but technically. So it would be much simpler to sell your wine bulk to big bottling companies. If you get a good price, like in the old days, talking about the 1800s, and you would sell it to big merchants, they would then bottle it for you. So all the complications are taken away. So the importance, I think, is not just the authenticity of the wine, which is a very important point today, but it wasn't so 100 years ago, although people were paying a prime price for example, a Petrus, and let's not forget the bottlings of Chateau Petrus. The most famous ones were not the estate bottlings, but the Van der Meulen bottlings, a Belgian merchant, for many reasons, which will never be discovered. But those were the most, the wines that lasted the longest and had the highest reputation. Maybe they had a very good bottling technique. Everything is possible. So back to why the bottling. Well, basically because you have a genuine project or product. The complications are well worth it, and that is for me speaking today in a modern era. In the old days, people were selling bulk because of the commodity, the easiness, and the facility. Because the harvest finished, let's say in November, wines were racked, cleaned, and they finished fermenting. And so the biggest sales, when you take the classic areas, were done in around May. So you cash the money and you have liquidity available to pay all the people for the work and also for the next harvest, which was only a few months later. So basically it's about rotation. So why would you bother to invest huge amounts of money to bottle? Because we're not talking just a machine, we are talking about, you anticipate money in the bottles, in the corks, in labels, in storage. You have to have the space to do that. So it is enormous. And if you take the let's say your winery space to transform the grapes into wine, and then you bottle, you need the same amount of space, if not more, if you want to give also bottle age to the wines, the storage, the pre-shipment. If you take all of that into account, your space for bottling, storage, and shipping is more than you need to produce the wine. So that's a serious consideration. For example, if we go to Etna, in 1858, the first bottled wine was brought on the market, which means in 1858, only 3 years after the Bordeaux classification, on Etna, Barone Spitaleri was bottling wine in mid-1800, who were fixed and focused by the bottling because they had a vision, I think, for the future, but also they were very much tuned in and focused on the French model of making wine. You know, you have to imagine it was a period where in Burgundy nobody knew what a bottle was, because I think basically everything was sold in bulk, in barrels. Even Bordeaux, very few bottles were bottled at the estate. So, you know, Etna was at the avant-garde of quality and also the search for excellence, which is absolutely astonishing. You know, 1866, if I remember well, was the first Etna Rosso wine, and then in 1870 or 71, they bottled the first champagne from Etna. So, you know, it was just unbelievable how far ahead the Mediterranean basically was compared to the north. I feel very, very privileged, and also to have only that one estate as a historical value, but it is an incredible, very important historical value. So besides that, if you look at the whole territory of Etna, if you take the old Palmento, the construction, there was an incredible I would say, high fidelity to the work, how a winery was made in gravity. Everything was just perfect, except for the bottling, which was never done. So the palmento finished in the barrel room where the wine was fermenting and, let's say, not even aging for a long time, because they had to have space, and so there was no double or twice the room for the aging and then the bottling. So, Etna, all the construction of the old wineries, Etna was not constructed and built on the principle of bottling. So it was an aspect that was missing. And so all the modern wineries are completely differently set up. We have space for the bottling lines, space for the storage. We have more space for aging wines. And so it is an accumulation of incredible investments if you want to bottle. But it gives you the guarantee that the wine comes from that winery and is not bottled and maybe cut with other wines if it goes through the hands of a bottler. And also you can keep track of the quality. The last phase of a wine, when it's transformed, gets ever more delicate. And so in the beginning, when the must is fermenting and goes through a big transformation process in the alcoholic fermentation, the wine is less sensitive and is quite rustic because of the turbulence of the transformation, the chemical transformation. The wine is relatively protected. Then you go into the second fermentation, the malolactic. It's already, I would say, more sensitive. You have to be careful. And once that process is finished, the wine is settled and is also more fragile for external influences. And there, everything starts. The attention to the quality of the pumps, the racking, the least possible oxygen. You have to take the wine in the right moon phases, zodiac if possible. And so everything gets more complex. And then you move into bottling, where everything is even more complex because it's the end stage before the wine gets its last racking, which means it finishes in a bottle. And so if I look at how much we invested, the rhythm and the amount, the quantity of investment has grown over the last years, which is strange because we're here since 20 years. We're investing, and actually the investments are getting bigger, which doesn't make sense in a way, but it does if you analyze why. If you take the biggest changes, take the least investments in money, the smallest changes, the details you want to change and to improving 1% of your wine in the end process will cost you as much as all the previous investments together, because you're talking about those small details, and they require so much attention and so much specialized equipment that it's just enormous. These are our two bottling lines. It's not even a line, it's actually the bottling machine itself. This one, very simple, very basic, was the first one we bought in 2001 when we were bottling the first wines. We had two of these machines, which we set up on one side to the other, and it works on depression. It creates a vacuum and pulls through a tube like this the wine from the tank into the bottle, which push into manually. It shuts with this washer here and the bottle and vacuum, and it pulls in. The excess wine goes into this collecting recipient, and then once it was finished, you pull it out, and the level was regulated by the height, which you can mechanically adjust here. Obviously it's not perfect, and so the first bottles you would have like a 1 or 2 millimeter difference in volume of wine in the bottling. Very basic and very simple, but it works, and it still does, because we use it now for samples. If we need to, let's say, use a more complex and a larger bottling machine like this one here, then you need to clean everything, and so it takes a lot of time. So if you have to pull like 10 or 20 bottles of samples, we still use these, or for small batches like olive oil, we use them now. So this we have been using until 2009, when we bought this machine, which is basically the same principle. It's just larger and a bit more sophisticated. So, I mean, in simple words, you have a common rail here, it's like the evolution of a diesel engine. And so the hose here is bigger, and so you can do more bottles. And so we here you do the same exact, it's the same exact principle, except that everything is more sturdy. These are plastic nozzles on the first one. This is already, everything is in stainless steel. It works a bit more precise. You have a better, I would say, adjustment of the nozzles. But it's still quite rustic. It has the same vacuum system. The pump is bigger. And so you can do more bottles in an hour. But basically, when I talk about a bottling line, we have been using this machine until 2014. And so when we talk about a bottling line, the human persons were part of the line, doing something. Like you have to put the bottles in here, you have to pull them away. Right next to us was the corking machine, which I'll show you later, and then we went into another part, which was closing the cases. So there's basically nothing wrong with this system. It's actually pretty good, but you're limited also in the time, the quantity of bottles per hour and per day you're using. And so when we were bottling in the old days, we started at 7 o'clock in the morning, and we finished about midnight, which was all very nice. If you have to do like 1,000 or 2,000 bottles, it can be actually quite funny. And so drinking also wine and tasting the wines, obviously, during the bottling, which is great fun. But then you get to 10,000 or 20,000 bottles, and so you cannot cope with this anymore. And so you need something a little bit more, I would say, not sophisticated, but better made, more reliable, because you cannot have a problem and then leave your tank open while you're bottling. So you need to have reliable equipment. And so this was definitely a few steps up. So after the bottling, you have to cork them, and the corking was done by hand with these simple machines, which again are used today for doing the samples, because it's useless to use a big machine for only the sample runs for a few bottles. So this is where you put the corks or the closures in. Here you put the bottle. This is a simple closure. It pushes, it squeezes the closures, and you push it in, and obviously it doesn't work here. We'll do that again. Just a second. And the bottle is closed. So the thing is, why would you invest in a completely sophisticated line like this one here, the automated guy, which obviously compared to the ones you just shown is huge. I mean, it looks massive, and the investments are huge. But the advantages these machines give, besides the fact that they're automated, and so you put the empty bottles in one side, and you got the full bottles coming out labeled on the other side, you can do many more bottles in on 1 hour of time. And so as an estate, there are a few aspects to which are very important. You cannot focus on only bottling. We are a farm, and so the people that work for us, they also have to work at other aspects. You have to do the rackings, you have to do the work in the land, and so we don't only do this. So it's important to have, in a minimum of time, doing a maximum of things. Otherwise, I would have a work crew of 50 people, which is unsustainable for a company. So investing in equipment is rationalizing time, but at the same time, and that's something very important for me, I want to improve the quality. So until I can improve and rationalize the work in the cellar, I also have to improve the quality of the work. Where that stops, that's where also the quantity we produce stops. So where I can improve and where the limit is of improving the quality of the products, that is where our quantity stops. And so if you want to improve, and you want to improve also the way of working, I also talked about the speed and the efficiency of working. You know, this does 1,200, 1,400 bottles an hour. And so even a small component, like for example this table with this different rolls and also this small mat with all these balls, it looks like ball bearings, which pushes the empty bottles in here, so you don't have any more clogging up. And so this small table, which seems quite complex and it's quite expensive also, but it's very important to maintain your 1,200 bottles an hour. Otherwise, you will have to stop your machine, you will not nourish the, your bottling line, and you will have like a dead zone with no bottles, and instead of doing 1,200 bottles an hour, you end up with 1,000 bottles an hour, which everything by itself is not a big deal, but all these small details makes you work also much better, much more relaxed. You don't have the stress that there's no bottles in the bottling line. You don't have to stop it. So everything goes much more fluid. What is still missing in this setup is the washing machine for the bottles, the inside of the bottles. Now, that is a technical issue which can be easily solved, but you need to do volume, what we do today. So if we do little volume and you buy your bottles from storage places, from distributors, then the bottles are produced, could be produced months before, and then you don't know where they're stored, and so it's better to rinse them. What we do today, as we have a certain amount of bottles we produce, we buy directly from the production unit, and that guarantees you that they're fresh, they're not stored anywhere. And when we store them in-house in our own warehouse, which is completely sealed and closed. And so that is an advantage. So we don't have the bottling, the rinsing inside of the bottling, because they come directly from the manufacturer. An important detail of the bottling is the filtering. There are different, I would say, philosophies around filtration of wines. And here we are talking about wines that are not sterile filtered, but gross filtered. This means that we clean up the wines instead of using a fining technique. Products like bentonite or others, we don't want to do. I thoroughly believe that it's better to take something out in a mechanical way. As I said, we don't sterile filter, but still I want the wines to be cleaned in terms of the gross, let's say the gross residual that should be taken out. And so we use a filtering system that is also related to the speed of the bottling line, which is very important. So here we've got 5 cartridges, and a cartridge is this. This is the filtering unit. It is a fabric which is made specifically to take out 1 micron, 2 micron, 5 micron, 10 micron, whatever you want to do with it. And so we use these also, this unit, which is called a housing, and where these cartridges fit into. This fits 5. Here it's 3 for, let's say, a last filtering. And we have another one coming now, which is 8 cartridges. These are important because they take out the residual you want to take out of a wine. So as I said, the technology today enables you to go more precise, where in the old days cloth was used without knowing how much you were filtering. You can use these specific cartridges with filtrations that are measurable. And it's also the same thing with the pressure you will, I would say, apply on the wine when it's being pushed through here. The bigger the housings are, the more cartridges, the more surface you have, and the least pressure there is on the wine. So those are important aspects, so that you don't damage, or I would say not damage, but disturb the wine when the wine flows through. So for our speed of 1200 bottles, this is relatively over-dimensioned. With a new housing of 8 cartridges, we will be completely over-dimensioning the filtering system, and so we will get the very little pressure on the wines when they go through the filtration system, and so the wine is much more relaxed when it goes into the bottle. So the technical parts in improving, like this equipment, is an important one, because it pulls a vacuum and also puts in nitrogen. So when the wine goes from this canopy, which is also put under argon in this case, it flows into the bottle. The wine doesn't touch oxygen, and so you have a constant protection of the wine. It flows out here. The level, what we talked, is being kept perfectly, because this machine here pulls out the excess of oxygen, and also the nitrogen, pushes it in. And in this part with the corks, which is in our case Achille, which is a special cork, which is a high-performing cork also for longevity, but also for maintaining the integrity of the wine. In this part, the nitrogen is pulled out. There's a vacuum that's being pulled in again here, and then the cork is being pushed in, which means there is no compressed air or nitrogen that gets pushed in, and so the wine is kept, let's say, without pressure. And so it's much more gentle, this machine, instead of just pushing a cork in and compressing the air between the cork and the wine itself. And then you move on to the labeling, which could be a capsule here. Some certain markets require this, not according to European law, but in Canada, for example, people still require, or the monopoly requires these capsules. Then you have the labeling, which also here is quite complex. So here you have one station that does a front label, and also together with this a potential side label, which is the case in our bottles for the top wines. And then you go to the second station, which gives you a back label in certain countries like in Australia, New Zealand, where you have to put the alcohol content, the pores, which need to be printed also on the label. And then what is not shown here, but there is the space for us. As of next year, 2022, we will have also the small fiscal tag, which will be glued on the bottle. In the case of Etna Rosso DOC, or Sicilian DOC. And so that is another station which will be implemented in here. So you can imagine how complex this gets with back label, side label, the front label here. You got this the tax band, and it is not a simple thing to just bottle the wines, because everything needs to be traceable today. So it has become quite a complex story. And it's not just simply because you make more bottles, because this is required by law. And so instead of doing all these steps by hand, this would mean a bottling line basically of one person taking out the empty bottles and putting them under the machine, taking it out, putting them under a corking machine. That's number two. Then you would have here 3 people just for the labeling, and then another one to put this into a case, and another one to work in and set up the pallets, which obviously is impossible. And then also being limited to about 2,000 bottles a day, which is ridiculous in our case, because I would immobilize 8 people that can work on something else, because we don't only bottle, you also have your rackings to do. pressings to do, the work in the vineyards, and the pruning. It gets very complex. So everything which can be more efficient in, let's say, a repetitive on repetitive jobs like bottling, which is quite simply putting the wine in the bottle, make sure the level is right, oxygen, vacuum, nitrogen, argon, labels, back labels, fiscal bands, or whatever else. So if you can do that in a much more industrialized way, also the people that work for you are much more relaxed. And so the whole process goes very, very smooth. And that is important. The efficiency of this line, as I discussed with the empty bottles, the special table, this is also a machine which is relatively expensive, but it guarantees you the right flow. You can fill this up on this machine with about 4,000 corks or closures, which are all in here, and it pushes the corks, the closures, to this tube into the bottle, not the bottling, but the corking part of the bottling line. And so you don't really have to watch it anymore, and so it tells yourself with a red light and when this recipient needs to be filled up again. So what this does is not only smoothen out the whole process, where it tells you, like, please fill me up again because I'm short of corks, but it also orients the corks. Like in champagne, they are the Achille corks. They are, it's a technical cork where you have a shuttle which touches the wine, and you have this this only the sense where it has to go into the bottle is only in one way. Another part which is a bit peculiar, and we use filters for all the inert gases. These are carbon filters which take out the smells and all bits and pieces that could be flying in there, because even if it's on food grade, argon food grade nitrogen, you're never sure whether it's perfect. So it passes through the filters and then goes into the bottling line. And it's the same thing with also the compressed air for the vacuum, which is all filtered, and then it's microfiltered, all the inert gases and oxygen and the air, compressed air. So yeah, it's a bit of a spaceship, very different than corking with the old machines, which I still like. They're nice. I'm never gonna abandon them. They always come in handy. Enough talking. To the future of Etna.